Railway Conversations with Doc Frank.
Hello and welcome to Railway Conversations with Doc Frank. I'm your host of this podcast, Doc Frank, and I'm very, very pleased to say that I have my very first female guest on the podcast in today's episode, Victoria Winder, who currently works in Brisbane on the Crossrail project. Victoria is a long-term specialist on signaling, testing and commissioning, also very much involved in system integration, which is pretty close to that. And you will see that we have a very wide-ranging and interesting conversation covering the Victoria line in London and the special challenge if your name is the same as the project you work on. We also talk about Crossrail, which is almost inevitable with someone who comes from London and worked in the railway environment there. And then we talk about the retrofitment of trains with CBTC in Melbourne. And on and off in between, we're also touching slightly on the inevitable topic of women in engineering. And I think you will find the views of both Victoria and myself interesting and hopefully inspiring for the future of our industry. Please enjoy the conversation. This podcast, as you know, is not sponsored by third parties. But instead of telling you again that I'm offering trainings on CBTC and advanced ETCS, I want to put your attention on two events that are happening in the very near future. On the 28th and 29th of March, I'm running a training course which is called Automatic Train Control and Interoperability. This course was specifically designed for Australia, covering the three ATC technologies that are contemporary in Australia, CBTC, of course, ETCS as well, and also the Advanced Train Management System, ATMS. And importantly, the interoperability challenges between those three technologies. In early April, I'm running a free event that will definitely interest you if you are from Melbourne, but also if you're generally interested in signaling strategies and have something to contribute on that. It's called the Melbourne Signaling Strategy Challenge. It's a 3-day event of 2 hours per day. We will be talking about different aspects of the signaling strategy for Melbourne and giving participants the opportunity to voice their views and their opinions and basically get a forum and be heard for their opinions. Both events can be found on the usual training portal, which is docfranktraining.podia.com. I repeat that, docfranktraining in one word, .podia, Podia.com. And on the same portal, of course, you also find my usual courses for CBTC and ETCS, all of them very recommendable. I hope to see you at one of those trainings or challenges. And until then, please enjoy my conversation with Victoria Winder. Victoria, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you for your kind invitation.
You're very welcome. And it's probably time to celebrate you because you are actually the very first woman on the podcast as my podcast guest. I had the objective when I started this to have a very balanced and colorful variety of guests. So I wanted to have international guests. I'm traveling pretty well on this from all kinds of different countries so far. I wanted to have a mix of more experienced guests and some of the rather new people in the industry. So I'm okay with that. But I also wanted to have some kind of balance between male guests and female guests. And the balance so far is like 11-0 towards the men. And I'm very, very happy that you committed to be the first female guest on the show. And I hope you're not regretting this at some point in time.
No, it's good to start off a trend. I'm excited.
Yes. So I came across your profile on LinkedIn because you posted something that I commented on and you kindly commented back. And then I had a look at your profile and I realized you had quite an impressive track record on system integration for major projects. I believe at the moment you are working in Brisbane for Crossrail. Before that, you had some involvement in the Metro Tunnel project.
And I'm interested, and I think the listeners are as well, how you got into this kind of field, which sounds very complicated to most people. So how did you get into systems integration?
It's so last week, as you just mentioned, I was kindly invited to participate in a panel for the project for the business as International Women's Day and week, and it sounds cliche, but obviously it's something that we should all, as individuals, say and try and install in each other, as be the change you want to see. It's not my natural environment to be up there and subjected to Q&As off the cuff, but I can definitely see there's been an improvement and a change in culture for anyone that just wants to get into this what can be quite a harsh environment when it comes to engineering, specifically railway engineering. So when I was asked, and then they read out my sort of a background information about me, and they said, Victoria's had over 20 years rail experience. It does just go in a blink of an eye. And I thought, I'm not old enough to have 20 years experience in anything, but here we are. I've just very organically, I started off in railway, doing installation, cable pulling, cable management. And over the years, I've just very naturally sat towards, I think maybe I'd like to see the end and the glory of a project to see what the blood and tears are worth. So I've always stuck out at the testing and commissioning phase towards the end. And it's just an area it's built and I find most interesting and most rewarding. And with that comes obviously the integration phase. So I was very lucky and stressed to be involved in the Victoria Line Resignalling upgrade for the London Underground back in 2008. That was a huge project. That was a key integration project because we had an overlay system. So we had an old legacy system with the new system being installed and the two running concurrently in regards to which rolling stock you were using. So they would have an old rolling stock, a 67 rolling stock retrofitted with some of the new CBTC equipment. And then when they switched on the wayside equipment that was the CBTC, they would change boxes in the car, and then that train would be able to see the new overlay equipment and use that. And just seeing how the technology was being used was really interesting. So that was a real hit and run lesson into integration, because it was all my previous experiences had been relatively greenfield sites, and this was a real brownfield site. So you can imagine London Underground has very little time on the coal front. So our worst nights were barely an hour, and our normal nights, if everything went to plan, you probably would get just under 4 hours or 4 and a bit hours worth of actual site time. So that was very interesting. But yes, that was my introduction into integration in all forms, in a community sense. So there was different parts of the project having to be coordinated to work together, and from a testing sense as well.
So you definitely started at the deep end. I think London Underground has a reputation to be a very difficult brownfield environment as far as brownfield environments go. And a few years later, there was another CBTC project in London that spectacularly failed because obviously the contractor proved to be unable to really get acquainted with the peculiarities, shall we say, of the London Underground brownfield environment. So it's certainly quite an impressive area to start in. And I would think once you've done something like the Victoria Line in London, everything after that should come relatively easy.
Well, you'd think I'd get used to hearing my name copious amounts of time. So yes, it was either Victoria by my name or just the Victoria Line. And sometimes the email subjects used to put the fear of life into me, but then I realized it was nothing personal. It was just the project that was going down the pan.
Yeah.
But that was actually quite I think I've just been very lucky in regards to the environment and the people that I've happened to have worked with, because there's definitely a culture where I can see people struggling to get on and move up in this industry, being a young woman. But I also think there is a time and a place where it's had a huge evolution over the years, but it still can be quite a boys' club in that sense. So when I was first indoctrinated into it, it was just a new environment that I sort of felt I had the novelty to peer through. You know, I was invited to sort of be among some of these some incredible people. Actually, I've been very lucky to have worked alongside and closely with some amazing project managers, project directors, testers in charge, testers. They've just all been very forthright and extremely experienced. So to sit alongside them and have that audience with them was just, I always saw that as an advantage. And there was a particular situation, if anything, it made me grow as a person, and I've just been very good now at sort of being able to get myself over uncomfortable situations, or, you know, if I need to say my own piece, I will quite gladly, unapologetically.
I think generally, if you work in a big project environment like this, especially with hand-on tasks such as you mentioned cable pulling and testing and commissioning, where there's a lot of external pressure anyway, I don't really think it matters too much whether you are a woman or a man. You need to have a bit of a thick skin there, because otherwise people just bulldoze you. They just run over you.
I agree.
Because the entire environment, the entire way how people deal with each other is just a bit tougher. Like, just get the job done, yeah. And
exactly.
So there's not much time to really take care of a person's feelings if there's a deadline behind it, or your testing window closes during the night or something like that, and you still need to get some things done, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, everything gets pulled to one side for that instance. Exactly.
Yeah. What I found, I personally quite like working with women, provided that they've got the necessary toughness in that environment. But the same, I must say, applies to men. I mean, I've seen a few vet flannels on the male side as well that you just couldn't have in a project environment like this. And the women engineers that I had in project environments, they were tough enough. They definitely stood their grounds. I worked for mining projects, for signaling projects in mining for a while. And if you think the environment in London was rough, then mining is probably still a bit of a different thing. Yeah, the amount of F-bombs that I used over 2 years was probably not countable, and I was not more than average, I would say, if not less. But then once you've got women in the room in meetings or so, then just the tone gets a bit more civilized again, I think, which I actually quite like. So that's one of the nice side effects. And I, other than that, I personally think that the whole women bring a different mindset to the job,
energy,
than men normally have. And to me, that's a very welcome balance. It's like a supplement, and if you try to do this without, then you're just missing out on something. But that's my personal view. I mean, other people may see this differently. I personally hope that this like old boys network culture is going extinct, hopefully sooner rather than later. Yeah, and for the simple reason of really utilizing all the resources and all the variety of resources that you can have on a job. Yeah.
You using your strengths is a massive thing to get ahead, and having, like you say, a balanced audience from all walks of life and culturally as well. It just brings a different dynamic to what would be a very sort of stale environment, because if you're this industry has changed, and very quickly as well, that if you don't bring that, if you're not dynamic, and excuse the pun, but if you're not dynamic in that sense, you're just not cut out for it. Women will maybe not necessarily be the most forthright in a room, but that's, I think, typically because we don't feel that we need to be forthright to be felt heard, whilst men might feel there's a bit more of an ego push to feel. So there's a difference in the balance that comes in. But yeah, I've certainly been the minority in most situations, but I can see a trend that's starting to form where more and more women are coming to the table and being part of the conversation, which is, it's just refreshing. But I equally wouldn't see it as a, you wouldn't want to be too positive discrimination, because you wouldn't want a woman, I personally wouldn't want a room full of women as well, because we're equally as bad at just, bickering in that sense. So it's just striking that good balance, I think.
I agree. A balance is really a good thing. And the last thing I would want to do is to basically pick team members on projects teams that I was responsible for based on quota rather than on merit. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think picking them on merits is it's a very valuable thing. I'm well aware that some people use that merit argument for discrimination. By just saying point blank that women by definition can't have the right merits, which of course is complete rubbish. But if you use meritocracy in the right way, I think it's a very useful thing, and it creates this kind of balance that you just mentioned. And it just makes sense. I mean, in a time where everybody is complaining that we don't have enough resources in the industry and projects and anywhere, if you basically just cut out half of the world's population by default, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. I mean, what's the point?
Exactly.
Yeah, if you think about bringing people in from other industries and you're basically sidelining a part of the workforce that you already have in the railways. I think that's plain stupid. Yeah.
I think for me, it's helped me out, because at the very beginning, I'm not technically trained in my profession. I'm not an engineer, but I've been doing this for over 20 years now, and this is all I know. This is a testing environment. Predominantly, I think I stepped away from the railway world for 2.5, maybe just under 3 years, and then came back to it, and it just felt like I refound an old worn shoe, and it was great to be back into it. But for me, I feel that or hard hat, I should say, but I feel that I've had the opportunities where I wasn't, as an individual, like you said about earlier, having a thick skin. I don't mind having a difficult conversation and asking what might seem to some people the most obvious question, but no one would dare to say it. So I would ask the question, and I would sit and invest my time with, and this is at the very beginning, and invest my time with those who were in the knows and making those critical and engineering decisions. And from that was what came from was very good working relationships, where I learned what the person would favor in a direction of work or style of work. And all that did is that we were able to tandem as a team. So I was actually able to represent my team in a meeting and acknowledge the conversations that were going in the room, engineering discussions, plan of attack, execution of contracts. And I was able to then go back to my team who were, as we know, we're against it all constantly. Time is of the essence, especially when you're testing and commissioning, because construction always takes far longer than it's ever planned for. And I was able to sit down with my team and just relay the conversations that we'd had. And I felt that was a very natural progression for me. I'm naturally a people's person anyway, so I don't feel uncomfortable sort of going in a room full of people I don't know. But I was able to sort of relay the conversations that we had, say this is the decisions that I made on behalf of the project or the team, and then I'd go back the other way. So I was trying to trying to maximize the time that my team would have doing their job, and also going back to the execs and relaying it the other way around. So I'm equally as comfortable going all the way down site, putting on my hard hat, high vis, or doing a PowerPoint presentation and sitting in front of the CEO exec. I'm quite comfortable in both of those environments. But over the years, it's fitted for me personally in my roles that I've been able to adapt and talk to either side of the fence, whether you're an engineer or a PM or an exec. And it's purely through just having those conversations, asking those questions, and generally feeling like you're interested in someone who puts that hard work in, who are the technical expertise, the subject matter experts, because they've done this for far longer than I have. And a lot of the time it's really interesting stuff, for me personally. My friends would probably think I was talking rubbish, but I think you either love it or you don't.
Don't believe so. I was just thinking that London Underground probably made a big mistake to let you go. What took you to Australia?
So obviously I was also working on Crossrail. That was an element that actually brought me over here. So Australia are having a huge investment in mass systems here, mass transit. And the project that brought me over was actually in Melbourne, the tunnel project, which is very distinctively similar to Crossrail. And yes, I think during COVID, for me personally, it gave me the confidence that all our conversations with our family and our friends were going through, WhatsApp or Teams. And I have worked abroad before, but I'd always go back home sort of for the weekends. And then it just became, when I heard that they were looking for people and they approached me, it just seemed like an opportunity for me. It would be silly to miss, because we speak the same language, we drive on the same side of the road. The system CBTC introduction was something that I was comfortable to sit in. So it was a very good opportunity at the time to take. So yes, it took about half a year to get all the paperwork sorted and my personal belongings shipped over. But it was a good, exciting opportunity to take up. After Crossrail.
Yes, I can imagine. And with Crossrail, from a timing point of view, did you actually miss that big turnaround when they announced the huge delay of the opening, or was that?
Oh, I was on the project during that time. Yes, okay. It was something that. Yeah, it was something I was. We were all part of. I knew it was bubbling in the background, and it was just a matter of timing to release to the general press and to the public. But it was something that it was fairly well known within the project that the 2018 grand opening wasn't going to be achievable by any merit.
This is interesting. Let me just circle back there before we get back to Australia, because that's really interesting. I mean, you may know, or maybe not, that I posted on Crossrail quite a bit and quite critical from a distance, where to the point where some people were probably upset. What's this guy in Australia doing? What has he got an opinion on Crossrail or something like that? But I was aware that from a lessons learned perspective, at the time I was responsible for lessons learned for an ETCS project in Sydney, digital systems. And with regards to lessons learned, all the tunnel projects in Australia, like the Metro Tunnel or also Crossrail, everybody looked at Crossrail. Everybody looked at Crossrail in London, and everybody took Crossrail as the big shining example of how to run a project like this. Exactly. And then all the lights seem to be on green. So to my knowledge, even in July 2018, there was still a project report saying we're going to meet the opening date in December of the same year. So basically just with 4 more months to go or something like that. And then in August, they suddenly pulled the plug and said, oh, no, this will be delayed. And it won't be delayed by 3 months or 6 months. I think at the end it was 2.5 years or something like this, that the opening came later. How was it to be in the project team? I mean, one thing you already said, that you were aware and the project team was aware that this is not going to happen. But at the same time, you were probably also aware that the project reporting still kept saying, yeah, we get there, we get there, we get there. What was the feeling in the project team? It must be like watching a train crash in slow motion. Yeah, we think, well, something will go very wrong, but the public is not informed. The stakeholders are not informed. The politicians are not informed. And I think it cost a couple of people their job, this kind of, say, misinformation or good weather reporting, I think, is the term that they coined in the UK for projects like this. How was that to be in the project team at that time?
It's obviously retrospect is a wonderful thing, isn't it? To look back and go, oh, this could have been done better. This could have been done differently. Hindsight is wonderful. It was interesting because at the time it was a very pressure pot environment. Literally, there was. It was such a huge project. The biggest construction project in Europe of its time at the time. Yeah. But for us, it was a clear distinction that towards the end, what was wrong, I think, from my perspective anyway, and I think a few people would agree with me, was that a lot of importance was put on the start of testing rather than looking at the end of testing, because what happened in the end was it was just a blank, right, we're going to start testing regardless of the system's availability. And all that did was actually just drag out the end of testing, and what should have been 10% remaining took 90% of the time towards the end. It dragged everything out, because the minute you start start dynamic testing with the trains, you're chopping off the arm of the construction side that still has all this residual work that they have to complete, but they're unable to do it because you're effectively running a railway at this point, but you still have all this residual work to complete, and you have a workforce basically standing around, retained, waiting to get back on site and complete that work. So the emphasis on starting testing was perhaps, now in hindsight, was just the wrong direction to take on, because the systems just weren't there. The integrity of the system, end-to-end testing, just wasn't sustainable to do for long periods of testing. There was a lot of testing at the beginning that was sort of full-fed. It wasn't a fully automated system. So even the bugs that you were picking up and putting back into the design office to rework through some of the software issues, there wasn't a true representation of the actual work and testing that you were doing, because it wasn't a fully automated railway, So It was frustrating, Doc, to say the least. It was very frustrating, especially because when the train started, it wasn't a scenario where we could just stop. That would have looked like a failure on every part, if the trains weren't sustainable or the system wasn't sustainable. So it was just literally, now you've started, it was just, you have to continue testing on what was a half-baked system at the time. It wasn't at all where it should have been.
Yeah, so basically backed yourself in the corner. I mean, not you personally, but the project did. I did do a lot of reading at the time, because Crossrail had a very extensive library almost of lessons learned documents after the project got delayed. Obviously, there was a public investigation, and Britain is quite good in these things. And so I read about cases where tests were set up, and then at the night when the tests were about to start, what are we testing? And it turned out that the systems to be tested were just not there. Yeah, so you basically you stopped your test and you went home because there was nothing to test. And you read those things and you say, how is that even possible? How can that possibly happen? But the way that I think you explained it right now makes it a bit clearer how those things can happen. Where some people still try to save face, still try to get it somehow done. Like maybe if we just start with the test, and maybe we still have a slight chance to get somewhat close to the end date, without recognizing that the basic homework before testing was just not done, which, as you said, would have meant forget about all the testing. We need to finish construction first, but then it would have been obvious that the test window, there was no chance that the test window could fit into the remaining time until tunnel opening. So it would have brought the delay to light much earlier, which to me would have been a good thing. Don't get me wrong. I thought the lack of transparency was one of the biggest criticisms about the entire project. I mean, projects can be delayed, and very often projects will be delayed. That's just the nature of the beast. If something is so big and so complex, and not everything goes to plan. But just pretending that everything is still fine, even though you've got progress reports with heaps of red flags in there.
At the 11th hour, of course,
Yeah, and you've got independent reports saying, well, this is not good, this is not happening, and then management basically brushing off those independent experts' reports and say, no, they're just doomsayers, so don't listen to them. I think that was the biggest. The biggest accusation and the biggest failure that was done. And afterwards, when Mark Wyatt came in, I know Mark relatively well because he was in Australia for a long time. You may know that, in Melbourne actually. And I think that Mike introduced pretty much from day one of his tenure was reintroducing transparency. Even if it was hurtful, even if he said, well, guys, we're not talking 3 months or 6 months here, we're talking at least 2 years. And just by putting this claim on the ground, everybody was screaming and shouting. But at the end of the day, that was the transparency that was needed. And that was and that gave the project team the time window that they had to have in order to do their work properly. If you still have like 18 months of work to do, and you know that you've only been given 3, you basically say from the start it doesn't work. It's impossible. And I mean, obviously,
absolutely,
that's not the attitude.
He also referenced on a few interviews as well, just the importance of integration as well. So not just as a project, but also on a system level. So that was something that we had a great team in doing so, but just trying to get yourself prepared to start testing on an interface level. You have your own sets of testing that you've got to do. So you do your functional, and then you'll do your interface. So your functional and God, my brain's gone blank now. Sorry, Frank. Correlation. Sorry. So you correlate back to all your design, all your functional testing, your principles testing if required, and that's just you making sure that your system stands on its own 2 feet and is a credible system. What you want to make sure is that every other system's been tested to the same rigor as yours. Because when you start interfacing together, you want to have a clear head that you're not inheriting other people's issues, because it's so easy. And this is you have to imagine you've got several delivery partners and with a huge commercial hat on. And it's very costly as well to re-engineer some of these software updates. So everyone, I think, would have loved if they'd had a bit more time to test individually their own component to the signaling and communication system prior to interfacing all of it, because it was just some of it was more was more mature than other systems, and then you'd fix one issue and debug it, and then all that was doing was masking an even bigger issue. So it was just it was a huge pressure environment, as I said earlier, and thankfully when the Mark Weil did come on, he did give everyone a bit more breathing space, but that was easily taken up with the testing that was required to do. That wasn't that was clearly given because we needed more time, and it showed in proof of the pudding, because all that time was clearly allocated to it. And then once you've got your core rail systems ready to test, you've got all the secondary systems, you know, all your CCTV, all the stations need to do all their scenario testing. And that's only done on the back end of making sure that the core systems are reliant, because without that backbone, you know, you can't really, you know, go forth. Because as you probably saw the other day, did you see that Sydney had done a software update and the entire timetable basically fell over and people couldn't get to work? And that's a workforce trying to get into a city.
A software update of what?
I think it was a timetable. I'm not too sure, but they were quite ambiguous in the news. But from what I could put together, I think it was a timetable update.
Mm-hmm. I think it's an art form in software updates to be able to roll back. That's really, really important. Yeah. So if you put in a new version of software and that automatically deletes the old version and the old version is gone, and then it turns out that you've got a bug, but you can't go back to the old version, that's really bad, because then you're stuck with that situation.
Yeah, not all systems are designed that way, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. But maybe they should. Yeah. Conscious of the time, I want to change gear again, going back from Crossrail. It was just too tempting not to go there, but there's something else that's very tempting to me personally that I definitely wanted to address with you. I think one of the things that you did after coming to Australia and Melbourne was to actually work on retrofitment of trains with CBTC. And when I heard this, when we had our pre-discussion and I heard this, I said, okay, well, that's definitely, well, we can talk about anything, but this has to be on the list. I'm not going to miss out on that. So how?
Hopefully my memory serves me right, but yes.
so how was that in terms of an experience, like retrofitting a complex modern signaling system such as CBTC on trains? And mind you, the trains in Melbourne, the HCMTs, were brand new by themselves. Yeah. But the problem was that the design was finished and they were manufactured before the CBTC design.
The CBTC, that's right. Yeah.
Far enough advanced. Yeah. I worked on Metro Tunnel myself, and I can remember a meeting where the rolling stock representative basically said, we have a design freeze in 1 month, so we need all the necessary information for CBTC onboard installation within the next 4 weeks. And the guys on the signaling side says, well, we haven't even started the procurement for signaling. We don't even know who our contractor is. Yeah, so that means we don't know which one is the product that we're going to use. And as you probably know, all the CBTC products are different from the dimensions, from the required interfaces, where cables need to be put and everything. So there was absolutely no way in the world that this requirement from the rolling stock side could be fulfilled. So from that moment onwards, it became clear that the entire thing would become a retrofitment, which in hindsight was sad or unfortunate.
Costly.
Because if you manage to align the CBTC installation with the actual manufacturing of the trains, it's getting much easier. And I've heard benchmarks from other countries like Singapore and so on, that the retrofitment of CBTC is about 3 times as expensive as a factory fitment while you're manufacturing the trains.
I can believe that, yeah. So the as you were just saying, so the rolling stock contract was awarded way before any of the CBTC wayside equipment was installed, tested or commissioned in the surface. So then we found ourselves in a situation where we had to bring in some of the trains and retrofit them with their onboard CBTC equipment and the DMI. And I think it was only cut over beginning of this year in January. So I've left the project, but it was something that I was working towards. It was interesting because you have 3 prongs that come into it at this point. So you've got the signaling delivery, then you have the rolling stock manager or operative side and maintenance side. And then you have the state who have bought this and it's their shiny new trains and they don't like anyone tinkering around too much with it. And again, it comes down to that keyword integration, just making sure that you've tested enough of your system to make sure that you're not inheriting someone else's issue, because you might pick up a bug and then go to a lab and recreate that test and you won't get the same outcome, which, you know, could be the definition of insanity for some people. Just keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different outcome. But then you realize that actually when you go back on site and rerun that test, it's to do with someone else's issue, but it looks like it's your issue. So it's been, that was an interesting team to work with, because I think at the very beginning it had to be said that we had to remove all sort of commercial worries and detriments as part of the conversation, because it had to be a working environment where everyone could be transparent and collaborative. Because if we took one side of the testing and they didn't have the rolling stock engineers on board who were able to, and some, you know, and a lot of the time, Doc, you know, these guys who work together day in, day out, they see it exactly what's going on. And then you're trying to do this from an office and you're not really accepting that the human factor side of it is sometimes the best way of a workaround. But we're sat behind a desk sometimes on a Teams call, and it's so easy to be quite aggressive and put your barriers up. But it was an environment that we'd really tried to promote, just being collaborative, because it was such a the contract, as you say, these are the trains that we were working with. There was no doubt about it. It was now just a case of making sure that the trains were being built as quickly as the system was able to deal with them, because they wanted to start replacing the legacy trains with these new HCMT trains. And on the face of it, these trains were being deployed without any additional functionality, but to the public, you know, they were like, oh, look, we've got brand new trains, but on the face of it, it didn't do anything other than just run on the conventional system, because the new railway system hadn't been commissioned at that point.
Yeah, but still, I mean, for one, trains are sexy, right? So from a politician point of view, it gives a very good motive on a photo if you stand in front of a shiny new train, and
absolutely
there are ribbons to be cut, and you can get videotape walking along the train and I don't know, holding on to the handrail and then sitting down and looking intelligent and everything. So politicians, when they invest a lot of money into trains, they love their trains. If they invest money into signaling, they love it not even half that much, because it's just nothing to see. Yeah, and with trains, I mean, even as a passenger, when Sydney introduced their new trains, they didn't do anything different. They just kept operating on the same legacy signaling system. But hey, there were new trains. So from a passenger perspective, coming from the old clangers, because obviously the trains that you replace are the oldest one in the fleet. The ones where the air conditioning is already a bit shaky, or even sometimes they don't even have an air conditioning. And then you introduce us with these new modern trains, and everything is smoother, everything is quieter, and the seats are still cleaner and everything. It is nice. So I can understand that politicians are very, very keen to get this into
and show off their
as quick,
show off their investment.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely, yeah.
And but the thing is, which can be dangerous in a project environment, that some people use this to basically drive their agendas. Yeah. So if you're on the rolling stock side and you want to promote your project, and you basically know that you've got the full support from the entire state government, nobody can come in the way of the trains being deployed on the network. You can brush off a number of things that may actually be necessary from other disciplines, always by saying, well, if you do this, then it's going to delay the deployment of my trains. Did you hear this, Minister? And the Minister will say, whoa, there's no way we're going to delay the deployment of our trains. And then things are just brushed off, and the rolling stock guy basically gets their gets their will. Yeah, which if you're using this basically as the driver of an agenda, that can be quite problematic. I'm not saying that has happened in Melbourne, but it was I've seen it before, so it's not unheard of that people use certain pinch points, political pinch points or contractual pinch points to get certain things through the door. Yeah. So, for example,
it's been a long-standing thorn in my side, really, because London Underground, the Victoria Line Resignalling, that was, albeit London Underground is a private, partly privatized business now. That you had the powers that be pushing down on the pressure because the amount of access that required was a hindrance to the timetable. So they were closing down the line earlier than expected. So that was, people that wanted to get home later than usual would have to get the rail bus replacement. So that wasn't good for the London mayor. He didn't like to have that on him. I was also part of the HS2 from a business capability point, and having to support the Royal Assent. Again, that was dealing with ministers in the government who, you can say as much as you want, and unfortunately, to try and really explain the issues that you've got, you fall down the technical side, and just no one ever wants to hear that at all. It's so hard to sort of speak in such layman's terms when you're trying to basically justify, for example, Crossrail was at the start of £50 billion railway, and when you try and explain to people the intricacies of what's going wrong, and they want it just very simplified, and you're thinking, it's £15 billion here. How easily do you want me to actually speak this to you in layman's terms? Because it's a lot of equipment. There's a few more stations to talk about, but it's just, unfortunately, the higher up the chain, they just want it in a simplified format, which has always been something that, it's something that's always baffled me, because I just think surely you'd want to know the crux of it, but they're just not interested in the nitty detail of it, in the weeds, shall we say.
Yeah, but that's a difference again. And I think you're getting used to it if you're doing this for a while. Yeah, if you talk with executives more often, then you get used to their style of talking, and you get used to what are the real focus points that they concentrate on, and what is all the waffle that they're not really interested in. I mean, if somebody doesn't really have any interest at all in the reasons of things, then that's a problem. Then you can explain it as simply as you like. At the end of the day, you're still describing a problem. And if the other person doesn't want to hear about the problem, then they will basically shut down completely. Then you've got no chance. But other than that, if they are really interested to understand it, they just need to have it a bit packaged more simply to really understand it. But they want to understand it. That's a very different thing. And then I think it really comes down to some kind of practice and also interest to basically pick up the other person where they are. They are not engineers. It's not their job to understand engineering in difficult terms. Yeah. It's their job to make decisions based on information they can understand. And then it's your job, it's your responsibility to basically spoon feed them the information in a way that enables them to make that decision. Because it's no other way. You can't say, well, I understand the technology, let me make the decision. No. You're not the decision maker. These guys are. So you either have them making stupid decision based on ignorance, or you put the effort in explaining it to them so that they can make an informed decision. And I obviously am a big fan of that second approach, and spend a lot of time there in training courses and what have you to
It's a line I've often used actually on my side when I try and explain if we have a bottleneck requirement, a bottleneck issue due to resources or just capability and site access or whatnot. One of the first one of the first contributions from senior management is to increase resources. So, I'll quite often say, don't give me 9 women to have a baby in a month, because it just doesn't work that way. Or you can't mark your own homework. So this testing has to happen at the level and sequence that is currently being planned out, because that is the integrity and the process that governs this whole piece together. The assurance community are expecting to see that evidence be packaged up in this way, and you can't mark your own homework. You can't have Bill or Sandy, go from design and just keep going forward with installing it, testing it, and then assuring it. You just can't do that. It would never work. And thankfully, a lot of people just champion that process anyway, and are very steadfast to make sure that it doesn't get infiltrated with shortcuts or, shortfalls in that sense. So that's why, people's mental health is so important, because, people under pressure are often the ones that make mistakes, isn't it?
Yes. And obviously there's a lot of pressure, because as we discussed earlier when we talked about Crossrail, things that basically indicate a delay of the project that could have been reported much, much earlier, they are basically swept under the carpet. But then when it comes to the testing at the end, the entire thing bubbles up. And then people realize, well, you need this much testing, you've got that much time left, this is not going to work. And then the people in the line of fire are the people doing the testing and commissioning, because they are the only ones left. And then they basically get the entire bashing, like it's all your fault. You're just taking too long for your testing. And he said, no. I'm taking as long for the testing as I said 5 years ago when we did the planning for the project. In fact, I'm accelerating, but not by a factor of 10, but just by a factor of 2 or something like that. So
I think people just generally don't appreciate the amount of testing that's required to provide a reliable, safe and operational railway. And even I still learn things on every project, and I've been doing this for far longer than I care to admit. But it really does come down, unfortunately, to the detail. And these people who are the important people who make the decision to say whether or not its integrity has been tested enough, that it says it's ready to be passed over to a public sector and allow paying customers onto a train. It says more about them, because it's information that goes way over a lot of people's heads, because it is so complicated, and we just don't have the capacity to even understand it, because it is really intricate.
Yeah. All right. I'm conscious of your time. I promised we finish this in under an hour, which I will. Thank you very much for your time. I think it was an extremely interesting discussion. We didn't spend so much time explicitly on this whole topic on women in engineering. We talked about briefly at the outset, and I think it became quite clear from the entire way that you communicated and explained things that how you basically have to position yourself in the industry to be successful as a woman, as you are. Yeah. So I think there is some more latent lessons in there for this entire topic of women in engineering, and I hope that people took something from it. And there are even more people in the future than there may be today that really accept women as a not just a necessary part of the workforce, but also an enriching part of the workforce. I was just looking for the right word. Yeah. So basically a positive supplement that creates a better balance in a project team and adds capabilities that, let's just be honest, for most of the males, including myself, are simply missing. So great.
Yeah, Thank you. Thank you for your time as well. I found this really interesting just to engage with you. Easily could have carried on talking, if I'm honest. But just on what you just said, it's, I pride myself and I look back to think, I hope that I was always picked to choose to be part of a team based on my capability. But I hope I was able to to get that opportunity, because people are starting to acknowledge and appreciate that a woman in a workplace is a friend, not a foe.
Yes. Okay, well, thanks very much. And to all our listeners, I hope that you enjoyed that, and you will also enjoy it if I get more female guests in the future. It's definitely on the plans. I've got a second one lined up in a couple of weeks, so you can look forward to that. That will be another great interview, I'm sure. And as usual, if you like that episode, then check out the other ones as well, and like, subscribe, download, tell your friends about it, because I still think that not enough people in the railway industry are aware of this podcast and see the value that is in those episodes for a wider understanding of the railways and also for entertaining factors. So with that, thanks again, Victoria, and everybody keep having a nice day. Keep it simple, and bye for now.